another edition of Nanotalks. This Nanotalk today is a recording of a liquid phase electron microscopy user webinar we did with Dr. Mohammad Moradi, who will be talking about visualizing biomechanisms on a nanoscale using our ocean holder, and he also had experience with our new stream system. So now you will hear a short introduction of the speaker, and after that we will see the recording of the webinar. So I hope you enjoy this Nano Talk.
And of course, the biggest welcome is to our speaker today, our guest, and I just want to take 2 minutes to introduce him to you. So Mohammad Moradi has a bachelor degree in chemical engineering from the University of Tehran and the Master of Science in polymer nanomaterials on preparation of polypropylene diamondoid adamantane, a nanocomposite, and simulation of its nanostructure using molecular dynamics method from the Sahand University of Technology. He has the experience of working in an R&D company, Researchers for Nanotechnology Co. Ltd. at Sheriff University of Technology, where he was managing a public education project to introduce the concept of nanotechnology to students in a national level. In October 2011, he joined the colloidal chemistry group at Eindhoven University of Technology to continue research on polymer nanomaterials. He worked on 2 parallax latex-based projects on CNT latex conductive coatings and encapsulation of vesicle template. In 2016, he joined the group of Nico Sommerdijk to study bio-inspired material formation at the nanoscale via cryogenic electron tomography and liquid phase electron microscopy. Mohammad is currently working on nanofluidic graphene liquid cells, which he will be showing you later on also in his presentation. So we have a very interesting presentation for you. I'm looking forward to it. So that was the introduction. Now we go over to the presentation.
Hello everyone. I'm very happy today that I can share a little bit of work that has been done at TU Eindhoven in this beautiful campus, shown in my slide on liquid phase scanning and transmission electron microscopy. As it is everywhere in the world, it is a developing toolbox in my view, and the best application for that will be the nano-bio mechanisms, including drug delivery systems or the interaction of nanoparticles with the cells and biological systems. I am Mohammad Moradi. I work as a researcher at the Center of Multi-Scale Electron Microscopy in Eindhoven, and now I am a member of the physical chemistry. Yes, electron microscopy at TU Eindhoven includes a few labs and facilities that can perform cryogenic, in situ, ultra-fast electron microscopy of different materials. We have the ability to work and vitrify oxygen-free samples. We can go to atomic resolution with our cryo-titan. We can do environmental SEM. We can do picoliter sampling using this item, and we have some holders from Dense Solutions to perform liquid phase in silicon nitride, and I am focused on the graphene liquid cells for soft material electron microscopy at this moment. The outline of my talk today includes these 3 sections. The chemical assembly, I will give you 3 examples about block copolymers, cobalt carbonate, and zero light leaching. Then I will talk about modulating the liquid thickness and a little bit of image processing that needs to be done to quantify the results from our experiments. And at the end, I will talk about the graphene liquid cells and the perspective of using graphene liquid cells in the future. So you can choose which part you want to listen more carefully. The liquid phase TM that has been done in the first part, in the first examples of my talk, has all been followed in an ocean holder from the solutions. In this holder, as you can see, you can basically in the ocean holder, as you can see, you put a silicon nitride chip in the middle and you seal it with 2 O-rings, and then you fix it with the screws here. You can have in our system, you can have flow in and out that loads a solution around your chip, and then it will diffuse inside. Most of the reactions you follow, because of the interface properties of the silicon nitride window and the water solution, or whatever solution that you use, is happening on the top window or on the bottom window. And it is, depending on what you're doing, helpful or a little distracting from the goal of your experiments. But this is the confinement conditions that you need to consider. In the first example, which is the vesicle formation from block copolymers, we have used the solvent switch approach. We have added a block copolymer of polyethylene oxide. The vesicle formation approach in the vesicle formation experiments, we have had the block copolymers of polyethylene oxide and polycaprolactone in an organic solvent, and then switched with the solvent was switched with water. Then the images were processed, as you can see on top, to know what is the history of the formation of a vesicle from the beginning of the solution, which actually showed that the vesicles are forming through a polymer-rich region where the phase separation is happening by increasing the concentration of water in our system. So the details of this you can find in the Nature Chemistry publication. But the thing to know about this was that there has been different theories for vesicle formation from block copolymers. One was saying that vesicle is coming from small patches of micelles and bilayers coming together and forming a vesicle. The other one was saying that a vesicle is coming from a spot, a micelle growing into a vesicle. But then, as we have seen in these experiments, both of them can be concluded depending on how you look at your results. If you go single frame sequence, you will believe probably that micelle growth is the origin of vesicle formation. But if you go with average frame sequences, you can conclude that it comes from patches of block copolymers. But the use of liquid phase electron microscopy has made this two theories combined and showing that these are just looking at the tail or the ear of the elephant. The other example I want to talk about is the cobalt carbonate formation, the beautiful paper of my colleague Hao Su, where the samples, very little samples of ammonium carbonate mixed together and under the electron beam were monitored with the changes that is happening, both and at the same time in bright field and dark field, which is the ability of the microscope at PNNL. So Eels and Saad also confirmed that amorphous cobalt is forming. For the image analysis, we have considered the bright field. We had to actually consider the effect of the precipitation that is happening in our field of view due to the illumination area. So to quantify what is the growth rate, we need to consider these kind of things, that the particles growing, the cobalt particles growing, are actually showing the contrast together with some deposit on the window that should be taken away from our calculation. So because of that, we have a background mask and a particle mask, where in the particle mask, you can see your the intensity of your particle is actually coming from the particle, the deposit, and the solution and the silicon nitride window. While in the background, you don't have the particle, but you have deposit, solution, and silicon nitride. So with this, you can actually conclude that the high angular dark field stem intensity is almost the thickness of the particle. So considering this, doing that the sum of the intensities is actually the volume versus the time, you can derive particle growth rates versus the dose rate that you can see is happening in this second image. From this, you can see that with the higher dose, the growth rate is actually higher and almost linear. So volume ratio increase versus the dose rate is giving curve, and then which means for volume, the growth rate is related to the square of the radius, and that is actually in the literature related to nucleation and growth by monomer addition mechanism. So considering all of these possibilities for the cobalt carbonate formation, and then knowing that the cobalt carbonate formation happens in a high pH, there was a hypothesis that in contrast to what is known about the electron beam effect on a water, which decreases the pH due to the mechanisms that we see, we have a local increase in pH. The hypothesis for the mechanism was that the supersaturation is defining the nucleation rate. The constant supersaturation equals to constant nucleation rate, and the volume of nuclei increases linear in time, as observed. And then the cryo-TEM helps us to see the nuclei in a sample before starting the precipitation, that actually confirms our hypothesis that the cobalt carbonates are particles are coming from precipitation of cobalt carbonate primary particles, which is a colloidal assembly process. So, having this in mind, we should also say that there are things to consider when you are working with bright field or dark field for the STEM and TEM. You need to consider that the illumination area in STEM is equal to the imaged area within TM. In right to TM, it is more than the imaged area. And quantification of the effect is quite important to realize what is happening in your background system. And always a certain need to calculate the precipitate that sits on your window. So the other example regarding zeolite leaching in Eindhoven was to understand whether the beam affects the rate of reaction and how does it happen for zeolite particles. You can see when we have continuous exposure, the leaching and disappearance of the zeolite particles happens in 38 minutes. While if there is no beaming for that period of time, there is still some particles remaining that under the beam will be gone in 10 minutes from the minute 40. And if we do these pulses, imaging at 38 nanometer, 38 minute, and then at 50, you can still see that the leaching process extends in time. So these we all have shown to you, and with all of these, I want to mention something about the calculations of the thickness measurement in a liquid cell, because normally when you have the cell filled with water, you get some bulging effect, and to avoid that in your calculations for background subtraction, we need to consider all of these. So we have done a modeling on the data that we have via MATLAB, calculating the four corners in the middle, and we have found that the thickness of the bulging of the cell due to the bulging effect depends on the pressure. So there has been calculations regarding the elastic mean free pass of the sample that you use in the system, and for different mediums you can actually have a profile of the thickness in each of these experiments, which we use for background subtractions in each of the previous experiments that I told you. Regarding the modulating of the liquid thickness, we have used pressure pumps on the inlet and outlet of our holder. By playing with the pressure, assigning the pressure of the outlet, we could actually change the thickness of the liquid and monitor that increase and decrease is a continuous reversible process that due to the reaction you're doing, whether you want to do that in a bulk and let the reaction go, and then you want to increase your resolution, then you can actually get a little bit higher resolution. You can work with this. So you can see here the domain of this increase and decrease is about 300 nanometers. So there's a beautiful review from the pioneers of liquid phase electron microscopy for biological materials, Niels de Jong, Francis Ross, where they explain the dose rates that can be reached and the contrast that can be, the resolution that can be reached by different beaming methods and for different materials. So for carbon materials or for gold, I suggest that you go for this. But what they show is that if you use graphene, then because of the very thin layer of graphene and very thin amount of water that you get around your sample, you can reach very high resolutions. Maybe that is the limit of the resolution for liquid phase experiments. The other beautiful work that inspired me to move and work with graphene sandwich materials, this beautiful paper in nano letters, where Niels de Jong shows that if you put your sample in between graphene, you can see that your sample is 7 to 10 times more tolerant against beam exposure. This is really surprising, and this is really important, because then we can get more contrast and more signal. By more beaming, you can divide this bit load of electrons that you can put on your sample and do 3D imaging, in my view. That means a lot. That means 3D electron tomography on biological materials in a wet medium. Then we started working and preparing this with a beautiful work of Pauline van Doorsen, who actually compared the different methods of preparing graphene liquid cells, like the touchdown method, grid sandwich, and the loop assisted ones, statistically comparing what comes out of that in terms of the success of preparing the liquid cells. But the beginning for all three methods was using a polystyrene film on a CVD graphene and then etching the copper away, scooping the graphene and the polymer spacer, and then bringing that grid to put the second layer of graphene on top. And it has been checked by elemental analysis and electron diffraction methods. It has been checked also by using fluorescent molecules which dissolve in water, and then with light microscopy you could detect the place where water is present, and then correlatively using TEM and finding out and statistically analyzing the types of water pockets that you can see. This is all done in this beautiful paper, where you can see the normal pockets where the two sheets are coming on top of each other is the majority that you can get from these loop-assisted method, but most of them are in the range of less than 350 nanometer. And then when you look for large water pockets, you may go for the crease type or the fold part. And the very important thing about this folded type of graphene liquid cells is that they're made with only one layer graphene. And you can see the examples here. To confirm that we have liquid and we can perform reactions, Pauline has done reductions of gold chloride solutions and forming metallic gold, checking the samples with TM EDX, which we think we thought maybe better to do that with EELS, but EELS was not the best suggestion for gold particles. But for other stuff, you can use it. The other thing was the effect of high beam, and then how to calculate how the bubble formation happens in the graphene cells, and that means actually how much dose in terms of water sample in the pockets we can put for imaging. But these were the smallest, the small pockets that we got with this method. We saw no limitation to put bigger materials in between graphene as long as it is less than 2 micrometer thick to be able to image them. But wood graphene help us considering all this literature that says that to graphene, if you use a spacer and the spacer is larger than a few micrometers, would touch, and there would be no water left in between them. Would this work for bigger particles or not? We have put some Nanotalks bacteria in between two graphene layers, and you can see the huge in that scale oceans of water around the Nanotalks radiodurans, which are the resistive bacteria against any kind of radiation. So you can see here that the effective beam causes very big holes of micrometer size, and that sort of shows how big the water pockets or the water encapsulations can happen when you use graphene layers. The other stuff we're working on is actually the multi-scale imaging of the materials from molecular immunoglobulin proteins, collagen formation, and also the Nanotalks radioduran bacteria of more than 1 micrometer size are all the things that we have expected. And what I was thinking about and what we are aiming for is whether we can image these small particles very close to the cell, and when they interact with the cell in this very thin encapsulated region, confined region, where they start to interact with the cells. This can happen for the virus interactions, this can happen for the nanoparticles interactions with the cell, and will be actually the very important achievement of working with graphene cells. But we need to be able to load these particles slightly later after the sample is inside the material. What we do, other than that, is that we use this beam exposure resistivity tolerance to gain some 3D data of liposomal particles, which you can see they have been imaged before by cryo-TEM, and it has been successful to get some 3D information and 3D reconstruction, and with some image processing you can see. As I said, one of the things we do is a comparison of the results from graphene liquid cell work with cryo. In these cases, we're not looking for the movement of the sample in the liquid cell, but actually we are trying to benefit from keeping the wet sample and the tolerance against the beam exposure. So in these cases, we're actually going for the higher limits, whether to see whether we can actually monitor a couple of vesicles together here. But you can see there are vesicles in this big ocean of water between graphene. While you see this big amount of water in 3D, you can actually see some shortcomings of the graphene work, where you get a lot of wrinkles, and the water bucket it's not in an ordered form. And on the left, actually, you can see the lightnings of the electrons that touch the graphene and salt in our system. The other thing you can do with graphene is actually to do live electron diffraction experiments. For example, in this experiment, we're looking at a potassium phosphate um, salt dehydrating due to the electron beam, and you can see what is happening in the electron diffraction signal. So you consider these happening in 3D and on proteins at low resolution. There is a lot of data coming out from this. If you're able to make less wrinkle. Do ELSA studies as well. You can simply check your sample for the oxygen signal to make sure what you see here is actually the water inside the material. I want to show you something here, a very important experiment from Hanglong Wu. See thing. So a very important experiment we have recently done or observed by Hanglong Wu was actually when he was doing the zero light leaching in a silicon nitride cell. He observed that apart from the precipitations happening on the window, there is a movement happening of a particle rotating from the left to right, and the others also doing the same, as you can see here, and that is caused by polymer film actuation, which inspired us to use this technique actually to introduce some controlled movements in graphene liquid salts. So we have started these new experiments that I show you schematically here to make some capacities inside our polymer spacer that we were using before, as I showed you. So modifying basically this random porous polymer film, something that we have carefully lithographed using SEM fibbing. And then with this, we're going to introduce, due to the actuation with electron beam, some movements, and maybe we're going to reach a sort of nanofluidic graphene liquid cell by this design. To conclude my talk, I actually want to show you briefly this recent review of Hanglong Wu, where they compared the different flow cells and static cells with their benefits and shortcomings, where you can compare the benefits of graphene liquid cells. I think with this new design, with the film that I just explained, we will be able to change these shortcomings of graphene liquid cells regarding the flow control, the initiation of the reaction, and heating of the system, which can be done using an old cryoholder to make these actually some new possibilities. And then with all of these, I think then there is not much who can compete with the new, let's say, nanofluidic graphene liquid cells. So go through this review paper. It has also a flow chart telling you if you want to do some electron microscopy, you can actually ask yourself whether LP-TEM could have an advantage for you. What is the temporal and spatial resolution range for your liquid phase TM, the maximum thickness of your system, and because of that, based on that, you can actually decide to go for TM, STEM, or SEM. You can consider you should consider the maximum electron dose on your system and whether it is sufficient using each of these holders or graphene or cryo, whatever, and then what are the effective parameters on your system, like the control of the flow, pH and electric field, which can help you to better design your experiment with electron microscopy. With this, I just want to summarize what I have spoken about. I have spoken about liquid phase TEM with support of cryo-TEM. This is very important, so to use correlative techniques with liquid phase, and using liquid phase also as a correlative techniques to other studies. I have shown that for cobalt carbonate, I have shown that for the block copolymers, I have showed how you can use with a pump to control the thickness of the liquid inside the silicon nitride. I have shown that you can use GLC-TEM for batch reactions, and I have mentioned basically this is very important. A graphene liquid cell is not just like 2 layers of graphene depending on the resolution and the amount of sample you want to have. You can replace either of the 2 graphene with a thicker carbon shell. You lose some of your resolution, but you make bigger particles to even encapsulate the bacteria in big water pockets, or let's say oceans of water in that scale, nanoscale oceans. We are working on a responsive framework with PIPSEM to make the first nanofluid GLCs for the possibility of initiating reactions in them. And I believe this is, when it happens, it is going to be the start of a new area of electron microscopy, where I would call them at this moment the electron transparent lab on a chip type. And with that, I want to thank you and all the collaborators and my previous supervisors and the fundings and the solutions for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. Please contact me now for questions or afterwards for collaborations. I'll be very happy to help and get help from you. Thank you, Olaf. I'm ready for questions.
We have a question from the audience, so let me read it for you so you can answer that. It's from
Yes.
Ahmad Reza Motezaker, and he thanks you for the presentation. And he says, in case of colloids with low contrast particles, not heavy and transparent ones, and fast moving dynamic, can graphene cells will be beneficial?
Well, what I wanted to give the audience as the message here was that actually with graphene and the flexibility of the graphene to stand on any kind of spacer, you can adjust the medium, or let's say the aquarium that you want to run your experiments in. So any kind of material you want to work with, you should be adjusting the spacer that you have for your material. I know that even with the silicon nitride cells, people have recently imaged some polymer particles, some latex particles, some vesicles, but the thing is that they were not able to really go for the high resolution. With graphene, you can do that. The examples that I showed right now were sandwiches of graphene over some like polymer vesicles, low contrast polymer materials, which you could see a very high dark signal from your polymer, which was not the case even in cryo. But the thing is that if you want to see the movement of those particles, you need a better spacer so that you can add enough water around your sample, so and some actuation from it's better to do that with the beam, but you can use a polymer which is sensitive to heat and temperature, and then to a little bit play with your liquid, because the smaller the liquid you have, the liquid pocket you have, the more chance that your particles get stick to the corners of the graphene interfaces. So this is all possibility, but also more to optimize for any kind of system depending on your size, your material, and the interaction with the graphene layer.
All right. Thank you for your answer. I hope it satisfies the questionnaire. So now I want to ask Annette, because Annette, you also wanted to ask a question or have a short discussion. So if you are there, you're welcome to unmute yourself and join the conversation.
Yes, can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to thank Mohammed for the nice presentation. And yeah, this was just about the difference between silicon nitride and the graphene liquid cell. I think was very clear in your presentation. Yeah, I wanted to ask, but at the end, you showed the graphene nanofluidic cells. Are you thinking about the possibility of liquid mixing in those kinds of cells?
Yes, that's the thing. I actually didn't show the system yet because we're working on that. Yeah, we decided at the end not to show the results because I don't know what they want to do with the results regarding the important of the work. But yes, that's the thing. We want to push the water because the pockets there are pretty small, so the water is pretty static. So you need something to move the water, like something like a gel inside your cell, and for that we are working. I mean, what I am experienced on is to make very thin layers of polymer, which can be with ordered porosity. So that's what I'm doing, and adding some patterns with fibbing to those porous polymer films is actually helping us to actuate that, whether we use a heating system with the very old cryo systems where you could simply attach a thermocouple and increase the temperature so that we see with the change in the structure of the polymer, we can move the liquid. So these are the preliminary results that we are obtaining these days. And yeah, I hope that soon we are able to show them to the audience.
All right, nice. Thank you.
All right. Mohammed, I have one last follow-up question from Ahmad. So Ahmad, thank you for your first answer. And he says, in the polymer cases, how the beam damage can affect the dynamic and chemical reaction there?
I'm not sure if I understood the question. The question is that the beam damage on the polymer.
How the beam damage can affect the dynamic and chemical reaction.
The beam damage on the sample. So yeah, one of the important damages we see in graphene cells is the bubbling of the sample, because it gets heated very quickly. Not with the single layer graphene. So as soon as you go for like carbon films underneath or multi-layers of graphene to make more mechanical stability of the cell and packaging more amount of water in your graphene cell, you get the higher risk to bubble inside your sample quicker than before. So this is all like the optimization of your beaming system. So as I showed, like also in the stream holder, you have to play with your beaming schedule. So you go for one of the very advantages we found is that when you want to follow a reaction in a liquid cell, or and the same for the graphene liquid cells, you need to make beaming time periods, and then when the beam is off, your reaction will go on apart from the beam damage. You give the chance for the accumulation of the energy and the electrons in your system to go away, for which graphene is a good option. So you can see the electrons are making less damage compared to cryo conditions, at least. but depending on the amount of water, depending on the thickness of the graphene layers you use on top or the bottom of your sample, you need to optimize the beaming procedure, let's say.
All right. He mentioned, yes, the polymer itself and the phenomena happening there. I mean, how to take the beam damage into account. So, did you answer that part, you think?
Yeah, the polymer itself is also part of the system. So in our experiments, the bubbling is the first thing that happens before the damage on the polymer. So most of the time, you're not getting there before you have the bubbles formed in your sample. So the first thing to be careful about when working with graphene is actually the bubbling.
All right. Well, he thanks you very much for your answer. And with this, we come to the end of this webinar. So with this, Mohammed, well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting experience with the recording and the connection, but I think we did great.
And I want to thank you and Dance Solutions for the support and the invitation. So thank you.
And that brings us to the end of this Nanotalk. To stay informed about upcoming webinars, I invite you to follow our social media channels, LinkedIn and Twitter. I also invite you to sign up for our monthly newsletter, in which we share interesting in situ research and technological innovations. I want to thank you for watching and hope to meet you at one of our next webinars.